Hello guys, how you doing? I'm Officer Justin Coleman. A little bit about me. I'm born and raised here in Columbus, Ohio. I'm 36 years old. I grew up on the east side after moving there from the north side of Columbus around the James and Livingston area. I went to Bishop Hartley High School. After that, I went to Ohio University where I knew I wanted to pursue a career. I didn't know exactly which one it was. I started out in physical therapy. Did that for about 3 years in college and decided that my real passion was law enforcement, and I made the jump. I've been a Columbus police officer since 2004, so now starting my 13th year. The majority of the time that I've worked, I've been assigned to our patrol area, which is out in a cruiser to the south and east side of Columbus. How many people live east or south? Anybody? Where do you live? Groveport, so just a little bit north of that. Somebody else have a hand somewhere? Reynoldsburg, so we're very close to Reynoldsburg. I'm on one of our community response teams, so we get the benefit of having a whole zone, which is 4 precincts. And we go from basically High and Whittier all the way out to Reynoldsburg and the Pickerington border. So it's a big area, and we have a lot of different things to cover. So I wanted to just share briefly with all of you today just my experiences and how opiates have kind of affected my route and my career and some of the things that we see in law enforcement. I was very fortunate to become a police officer when I did, and I got in right before the big opiate epidemic that we are currently going through now. When I first started working as a police officer, a lot of the things that we were seeing were prescription pain medication. So we got to see the transition from prescription pain medication onto the heroin and fentanyl and things like that we're dealing with now. When we first got on, the biggest thing and biggest issue that we had were injuries, work-related injuries, athletes, students getting injured, utilizing pain medication, and then transferring over to the abuse side of it and then going from there. It was something that we didn't really know what we were getting into. We would catch people coming from Florida with bags and bags and bags of pills, and we really didn't know what to do with it at that point. It wasn't until a couple years into the job that we started seeing the transition from those pills over to heroin that we really knew that we were in trouble, especially here in Ohio. What have you guys learned so far about today in the opiate crisis that we're dealing with?
Opiate drug overdose has been raised like 61% since like 2000.
It has. It really has. One of the things from a law enforcement perspective, right, we're always taught that we're here to be the punitive side of things, right? So if you or if anybody commits a crime, then we have to punish them or we have to do something about it. Does anybody know what Narcan is or naproxen? What is it?
That's the thing that's been given out to a lot of like police officers and firemen that helps like reverse the effects of an overdose.
Yep.
And saves a lot of lives.
Yep, it does, and it's amazing. So we went from having the ability to deal with, hey, this is a fire thing, to now we're the ones that are carrying and issuing Narcan and naproxen, which is crazy. We used to have overdoses 2-3 times a week. We would respond, we wouldn't know what to do, or we had to wait for fire to be able to help. Now we have them on a daily basis, sometimes 2 or 3 times per shift per precinct, depending on where you work. And a lot of us are deploying Narcan multiple times a shift, depending on who we're dealing with. And that was one of the biggest things that changed for us is we went from a punitive side to kind of a life-saving side to a more of a treatment-oriented type of way that we go. It is changing. And if you know anything about police officers, they're very reluctant to change, especially when you tell them that you are no longer going to be locking up people for certain things. We're going to go to a treatment route. So the opiate epidemic has kind of changed our mindset as a law enforcement agency in Ohio, as one of the leading law enforcement agencies and largest in the state, to how we combat it. Just going from a punitive side, it wasn't working. People were going to jail for a night, they were getting back out, and they still came out with the same issues and problems. Judge Vanderkar, who was a great advocate for the epidemic that we're going through and that has helped a lot of the speakers that are here, really stepped up to take a leading role to help us kind of understand, hey, we've all got to kind of look at this in a different way. And now we started attacking it in a different way.
We didn't really talk about the drug. Like, what is it used?
Opium or any opiate. So heroin is it comes from a poppy plant. You score a poppy plant, you extract what comes out of it, and it actually gets produced and made into heroin. It gives you a euphoric state, just like any other drug. But it slows your heart rate. It can slow down your breathing when you go through the overdosing sides of it. And it kind of can, it was utilized for pain at first with morphine, but now it's one of those things that's abused because it was a thing that was created to help others get off of other drugs. They're not the same thing. Chemically, they're different. If you kind of look at the creation of heroin, morphine, fentanyl, things like that, they were kind of, one was created to kind of get you off of the other one, to help you cope with the other one. So opium was very, very popular, and it became abused. So morphine, I believe, was the next thing up to help get people off of opium. Well, that became abused. And then heroin came about to help there. That became abused. And then you have methadone that was created to help get you off of heroin. And now that it becomes abused. So everything kind of that was created to help get you off of the other thing of the abuse was kind of utilized as an abused thing itself.
So is heroin made from the poppy too?
Yes, it is. It's ultimately it's cut with other things and created with I can't remember the actual chemical makeup of it, but it is from the morphine side of it.
So the drug that counteracts that you're giving?
Yes.
How are you giving that?
So
In shot form?
it's not a shot. We do it. It looks like a shot. It's in a nasal form, and I wish I had one that was here today. So think of a syringe, right, without the needle on top. The naproxen eliminates the effects of the heroin, eliminates the opiate effects on the body, but it's only a short-term solution, right? We still got to get the medical need. So if we find somebody that's having an overdose issue or overdosing on what we suspect to be an opiate or something, a painkiller, we inject it in their nose. It's just like a nasal spray. Has anybody had a stuffed up nose? You've taken a nasal spray and it helps you clear it up. It's just like that. And it's amazing to see the effects of it. You put it in, hopefully it can get into the system, and immediately that person starts to come back alive. But it takes away the effects, that euphoric state, and that effect of the drug. So now we have an individual that we just took the effects of the drug away, and they're back and able to function right away. So we've learned that you've got to be ready for anything that happens, because a lot of times that individual is not very happy about the fact that we just killed their opiate high, and they can be very resistive, or they'll come in and they'll go right back out. We've had individuals that we've had to use multiple doses of Narcan on them, or naproxen, just to get them to the point to where we can transport them to the hospital, where further life-saving measures can be enacted. The most that I've ever seen used were 9 different doses of Narcan or naproxen on an individual that was on the east side that we used prior to him getting to the hospital. Yes?
So the spray works on both, like, for opioid overdoses and opiate
Yes.
overdoses? Okay.
Yes, it does. And if we just think of an individual that is having a reaction or something to it, but it ends up not being an opiate, there's no effects, right? So it's not like we can, we have to be sure that we'd use this. But it'll knock it all out. And if it doesn't have any opiate in their system, we can progress on to something else because we can see it's not going to have any negative effects on it at all. Go ahead, Lee.
So what's the point of making something to get somebody off of something if that's just going to be abused? Why is there still a circle?
That is the circle, and that's a great question. And when you come up with it, you're going to be a multimillionaire to be able to catch it. No, the reason is because one is better than the other is the thought. If you can utilize something to ease somebody off of the symptoms of the addiction for something, right? Cutting things cold turkey are very hard, or eliminating them totally were things that just weren't working, right? So to be able to get somebody off something, you can medicate them with another thing to help them ease the addiction issues that they have on that drug to get them off. Ultimately, the goal is to eliminate it altogether, right? But sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Each individual, it's kind of based off of them, on their ability to go through it and go through the whole process with a lot of other things added in. But it sounds crazy to create something else, right, that can be abused, but that's just how addictive these types of things and opiates are, right? Yes, ma'am.
Is there a reason for why it's not given in certain formats instead of the nasal?
Because if you think about it, injecting somebody into it, trying to find a vein, things like that, can be very difficult, especially if you're not trained for it. A lot of individuals that use or utilize things intravenously, they have collapsed veins, and finding veins can often be difficult, even for doctors and others at hospitals. The nasal, breathing it in, is one of the fastest ways to get something in your bloodstream with the blood, with the pores and receptors and everything. And again, it's just an initial thing to kind of revive them right away before they can get to the hospital and hopefully get other life-saving things, right?
Couldn't you say that some Narcan is being taken advantage of if every time somebody overdoses, they're just going to get shot with Narcan?
That's a question that's asked often. And the reason that that's asked is because I've been to 2 separate houses where earlier that week we've deployed Narcan on an individual and had to do it again. The person is now back home from the hospital, and they're still utilizing whatever put them in that position. But you have to think about preservation of life, and preservation of life over anything else is what's important. Addiction, as you guys will learn, talking to a lot of other panelists today, addiction is a lifelong struggle, right? So me using that Narcan or not having the ability to do it and having somebody die or not being able to kind of rebound from an overdose and even put in a position to be able to hopefully fight their addiction and be able to get off of it one day, that's just not an option when something else is available. That is an argument that gets put up a lot, and ultimately preservation of life over everything else is what's important.
How
So,
often does it happen where they actually recover?
fully recover?
Yeah.
Well, we have a lot of success stories. I'll share one with you guys that happened to me, but it's one of those things that we don't know because it's a lifelong process. We have a lot of individuals that do better and they're able to kind of make something of their lives, but we just don't know. Any relapse can happen at any point in time. I'll share something with you guys. So if opiates affect everybody in different ways. I'm a law enforcement officer. It affects me at my job because I've been stuck with needles. I've had to go get tests to see if I was HIV positive. That has an effect on my family, right? Because you can't be with your loved ones because you can possibly get them infected. You have to be very careful about participating in any sporting activities, going to the gym, getting cuts, anything like that, right? Because you got pricked with something. So it's always great to learn a couple months later that the person that had the needle and you're not any communicable diseases or anything like that. But I was also dealing in the south end of Columbus with a traffic stop one day, right? Again, as police officers, we always tend to be a punitive person, and we're always looking at, right, being the authoritative person. So traffic stop happens. I had an individual that took off with me attached to the car. I went for a nice ride. Luckily, it was a nice snowy day, and there was plenty of ice on the ground. So the person just drove away with me attached to the car because they didn't want to stop. And it was after watching a drug house and seeing them with drugs in their lap. There's a great video of it. If we had more time, I would show it to you briefly so you could see it. But I ended up, oh, I'm sorry. But I ended up with a fractured shoulder, torn labrum from 12 to 9, and then a torn bicep tendon in my left shoulder as well, right? So that person, unfortunately, was afraid of going to jail and was an addict. But you asked about, what happens, how many success stories do you have? She ended up going to prison, especially for the injuries and the damage that was caused. 4 years later, I ran into her at one of our community control houses that's here in some of our neighborhoods. She had no idea who I was, but I knew her because I remembered her name. And she told me her story as I was talking with her. When I told her who I was, she broke down and started crying. She said, I knew that night that something bad had happened. I thought I had killed you, right? So she had no idea the extent of the injuries, but thought it was really bad just because of how everything happened. But I talk to her often, and she is now 2 years sober and clean, and doing really well, trying to reconnect with her family. So those are great success stories out there. It's just we don't have the greatest way of, personally being able to engage and determine which ones they are.
Like, not specifically.
What's that?
What age were you?
She was 27 years old. Yep, when it happens. She was the one driving the car, correct. Yep. So, and I talked to her about it, and just like, how old are you guys, the majority in the class, ages? 14 to 16 years old? All right. So, she told me her story, and it was this. She was in high school in the later years. She never finished. She would go to parties. She started taking painkillers and prescription medication. She first started experimenting with drugs there. It seemed like one of those things that everybody was doing. It wasn't a big deal, only it was very addictive for her. She didn't know it, but she had addiction in her family, and then she became addicted herself. After that, she worked a little bit, but she was only working to control her habits, and then she became involved with criminal activity, where stealing, things like that, to continue to support her habit. Prescription pain medication was going through kind of different legislative things where it was harder to get and it was more expensive. And so that's how she turned to heroin. Once she turned to heroin, she kind of, let that dictate her actions. And that's how we ended up meeting that on the street and kind of went from there. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so now there are these places, well, some places have them where addicts can go and like shoot up heroin.
Yep.
And it, like there are like volunteers there. So how do like you and like other police officers feel about that? Because
That's a very good
it
question.
saves lives, but it also sort of feels wrong.
And that's a very good question. The safe zones, right? And there's a project here locally in Columbus that is one of them. It's Safe Point, and we've been given kind of regulations and rules that possession of a hypodermic syringe is a possession of drug paraphernalia. But if you're within a certain radius of these safe zones, you cannot be held accountable or charged with that possession. But legislation has also changed where if you have somebody that's going through an overdose, instead of fearing penalties for getting the police involved, where we show up and now we're going to charge that person if they have any drug stuff on them, or if it's in a house, we go to the house and we charge somebody else at the house for felony 5 level possession. There's now legislation that says we can no longer do that. You're kind of protected with protecting the person. It is. It's one of those. So
Those places are common knowledge where they are.
yes. You can actually go online and look them
I
up.
want to know where they are, but
You need to find one.
The Columbus, yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out how would you go about looking?
City
for
of Columbus Board of Health has them, access to them. You can actually go online, you can Google them, and Operation Safe Point is what it is, and it's very different. Like I said at the beginning, you know, changing the mindset of law enforcement, like with Vanderkar and a couple other judges, it was very difficult to do, but we had to look at it as this is an epidemic, and you know, we've got to be willing to change and assist to help, you know, legislators and other individuals. We've got to listen to find out how we can make it better.